I'm Rebecca Minkoff, and I'm here to tell you that success isn't a walk in the park. It takes grit, resilience, and a willingness to take risks. Take a listen. Wendy, welcome to the podcast. I'm finally so excited to talk to you, and you've been so gracious and patient with the insanity that I've dealt with the last couple of months.
No, thanks, Rebecca. I'm so excited that we're here today, and I've really been looking forward to this.
So I was excited when I read about your story. You know, it's very rare to meet women who have ascended the music industry ladder. And I would love for you to just start, like, what got you interested in music? And did you know that this was going to ultimately be your path?
So I am originally from Singapore. And I think coming from a very working class family, and I actually grew up in Malaysia. My parents were Malaysian. And I somehow always knew what I wanted to do. I knew what industry I wanted to work in, rather. And it was always music. And that hasn't changed in all these years. From a very young age, I think one of my earliest memories, this is so random, is my dad boosting me up at the age of 3 or 4 so that I could put on the ABBA multi-track to Dancing Queen.
Oh my God.
And I know it's kind of funny that I have this clear memory of that happening, and just growing up in a household that it was good and bad sometimes. Like, my parents love music. They love all kinds of music. They also love to play at volume 11. So it was always really loud in my house. And growing up in a family where Cantonese was our first language, and Cantonese itself as a language it sounds like you're fighting all the time. It sounds like you're fighting at the top of your lungs.
Oh my God.
And the music is blaring in the background, and it's very chaotic. And it was a very small apartment. There were 4 kids in one room with only one bunk bed. So 2 of us, we had a rotation where 2 people sleep on the floor and the other 2 get the beds, so you can imagine like the chaos and volume in that tiny little household, I think, that I grew up in.
You all shared one room, the parents included?
No, my parents were in their own room, and me and my brother and sisters were in another room.
Okay.
Yeah. So I somehow, like, it was a bit of a transition, and I'll just kind of spend a little time on this. So I was actually born in Malaysia, and I ended up learning Bahasa in school, which is the language written and spoken that they have in Malaysia and Indonesia. And English at that point was 1 hour a week. We had 1 hour of English class a week. And when my family decided that we were going to switch schools to Singapore instead, because my dad was a customs officer for the Malaysian government, and they were constantly moving the family around. So grew up in a very nomadic kind of way. Everything suddenly flipped, and all my subjects were suddenly in English with, it was a really interesting way as a young child to suddenly flip the script, and suddenly everything was in English, and relearn everything almost at the age of 12. I did well enough in school, and when it was time to move to college, I had lost a lot of interest in school, and I was actually going to the best school in Singapore. It's called Raffles Girls' School. And it's almost like a private school, but it wasn't. And from there, I actually ended up going to we said polytechnic, and I know you have polytechnics here as well in America. So more of like a technical,
like a skills, like you go to learn a certain skill.
Yeah, and I attended, a mass communication class, and that was when I actually fell in love with learning, and I also realized that I always enjoyed it. I like practical things. And going from learning history and geography and mathematics to suddenly learning about radio production, TV production, public relations and advertising, and it opened up my world, and I knew right away when I attended Polytechnic that music is where I want to be. And I was on our school radio station. It was the only school radio station that existed in Singapore, and it was only in the second year of operation. And I had the opportunity to go around to all the record companies that are based in Singapore and go around asking for handouts, basically. Like, it was back in the day of CDs, so we had to physically go
Oh
to the
my
labels
God.
and collect CDs and play them on our school radio station. And I don't know, it was a really fun time. And before, I think I graduated on like a Friday, I was offered a job as a marketing assistant doing soundtracks, new age and jazz. And I started on a Monday. So I had a
Wow.
weekend to get ready for my new role. Um, so yeah, from there on, I think I knew I wanted to work in music. I just didn't know what aspect of it. I think at one point I thought maybe I could be a music journalist. Um, I tried my hand being on stage, and I was in school like singing and competitions and all that. Very quickly realized like, no, I like to be behind the camera,
Yeah.
backstage. That's what I like. So
Um,
the business of music appealed to me, especially once I started working as an assistant at the old version of BMG. BMG exists these days,
oh
but
my
back in the
God, you're
day,
sending me back. Like BMG was like, when we got the subscription, it was everything.
yeah, yeah. So that's how I got my start, in the music business, and it was in Singapore, which is I think today people know where Singapore is because of Crazy Rich Asians, the movie. But back in the day, like it's such a small country. You can go from one end of the island to the other in about an hour and a half. That's
That's
how
it.
small it is. It's very small. Yeah.
Wow, I had no idea it was that small, and I'm terrible with geography. So I just assumed it's a big country because you hear all about the rules, and if you spit gum, you get arrested, and it's very
Right.
strict, right?
It's tiny. It's
Yeah.
you can't find it on a map really. Like it's a dot on the map.
Wow. So once you were there, did you see a path for yourself to rise through the ranks? And or did you spend time experimenting and sort of getting to know what you did and did not like?
I was always very laser focused. I knew that I was in the right place, but I also very quickly understood that Singapore, as much as I love the opportunity that was given to me, Singapore is a very small market in the bigger scheme of things. And I was a bit of an Anglophile when I was growing up. So my dream and my ambition was to actually move to London and work on, my favorite bands it coming out of the UK. Instead, I got to go to Hong Kong for a Walt Disney music conference when I was still in Singapore. And I think that was my first instance of like, I don't have to live in Singapore forever. I can go anywhere that I want to. And that was a revelation to someone growing up with very little, I think. Um, and I told my then boyfriend, like, guess what? I'm going to move to Hong Kong in like a year. And he was like, how? And I was like, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out. And it really did happen. It kind of all came together. I put together a really successful marketing campaign for the soundtrack of this movie, which you might have heard of, Reality Bites with Ethan Hawke and Winona
Yes,
Ryder. I
yes.
know that's how old I am, but so it was a huge success in Singapore, and it got press coverage and all that. So my bosses in sitting in the Hong Kong office, which was like the regional office for Asia Pacific, they suddenly saw me and thought, oh, she could do well in a regional job because she's got really good ideas and seems really driven and is young and eager to learn. So within 2 years of my career in Singapore, I got moved to Hong Kong.
Wow.
And that's when the travel really started. I think like I went all over Asia, including Japan, Australia, New Zealand, really learned about culture and music tastes and the business intricacies involved in each different country. I think people often lump Asia together in one boat, and then they go Australia, Japan, New Zealand, but it was very good for me to learn how to really work this diplomacy muscle, and that comes a lot in doing a job like international marketing, which eventually I realized that was what I was doing. And I was in Hong Kong for 4 years before I had the opportunity to move to New York. And I was married in a past life, and my then husband got this job in New York in advertising. So I moved with him without a job and no contacts, and basically hustled my way into a job at Arista Records working for Clive Davis.
I mean, let's stop there. How do you hustle your way into a job with Clive Davis?
Well, I myself sometimes wonder how it happened. Like, all I knew was I had to keep approaching people to just have a conversation, right? I think these days we call it networking. Back then, I just was just desperate to talk to anybody that I could. And so I was doing a consulting role at an ad agency just because I started to meet all my ex-husband's friends, for example, and realize that, oh, okay, they actually need people in music that can help translate, if you will, the how it works in the music business with advertising. And my bosses back in Hong Kong, bless them, because they always had my back. And they were also helping to introduce me to people that they knew in New York. And before I knew it, I was being interviewed for this job doing international marketing at Arista. And there was no rhyme or reason that they should have hired me, like, because the job was to work in hip hop. And a lot of hip hop and rap was banned in Singapore when I was growing up. So I had no business doing that. I felt like I didn't understand the history of hip hop. I grew up in a society that was really very Asian, so didn't have a lot of cultural references either. And I got the job at Arista, and within like a couple of weeks, like 2 or 3 weeks, I think it was, I found myself in Paris with P. Diddy. Excuse all the issues that have happened with him since then, but
You didn't know then. No one, you're not to blame.
yeah. So he was fresh off the success of the Notorious B.I.G., and there was his solo music was coming out. So I became his go-to person on putting his name on the map, literally. And I got to travel the world with him. And he was the first major artist that I got to work closely with, and really saw, how everything comes together from a business level anyway. And at that point, it was very interesting working with him because he also launched his fashion line at that time, Sean John, which made a huge splash, right, in fashion and streetwear. Um, and his life was constantly on page six, like he was dating Jennifer Lopez. And so for me, I learned a lot from just watching and observing and listening. And I did really, really well at it. And before long, I still really have my heart in hip hop, because I got my start there. And I am also very proud to have worked closely with OutKast back in the day, and bringing them to their music to the rest of the world as well. Just to be there right at the beginning, it feels incredible, to see artists be able to start from very little, like the two guys in OutKast, Andre 3000 and Big Boy. They were just two guys in Atlanta, and it was a very regional Atlanta thing.
Yeah.
And over the course of a couple of years, they became global superstars, basically. And to be alongside them for the journey and helping to navigate the ins and outs of different countries and what's needed to be done in the UK as opposed to Japan, as opposed to Germany. Like, I learned so much from that. And I started working beyond hip hop. I started working with artists like Alicia Keys and Pink and the Foo Fighters and the Strokes. And it opened up my world to different types of artists and music.
So it seems like sometimes with an artist, and I'm curious your viewpoint on this, like they hit it and they just go, or prior to us recording, you mentioned an artist that was big and then lost their way due to bad management or whatever. I have a friend who was in a band. It looked like it was going to go and then it just stopped and then she morphed into something else, right? And hoping that is now what she is. And my husband was in a band, and then in 2008, when the music industry imploded, he got a call like, "Come get your masters. We're going out of business."
Oh
So
my God.
from your sort of view, like what is it that you think is that special thing that the ones that have survived have in them and that you're able to see from your job?
I think one way to describe it is being 100%er, if you will. And that is especially relevant today than it was maybe 30 years ago. I think 30 years ago, some artists were content to just focus on the music that they were making and understand that they needed to do interviews around it to promote their music. And it was a little cut and dry back then, but having a strategist behind you, whether it's your manager or it's someone at the label that you're working closely with. And for my part in the matter, I became very, very good at marketing and promoting artists, and managing their global campaigns outside of America.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, I think that there's still this special sauce that it's hard to put in words, right? I think you see it whether you're in fashion or in publishing or in music. Like you meet someone, the music resonates, and that's great. But meeting the artist in person, like sometimes things just click together. And if they're 100%er, meaning that they're willing to do all these different things to advance their career. And it's a special balance between being yourself and understanding your own brand, if you will, but also open enough to take advice from someone trusted, and really understand why we're doing certain things and really leaning into it. And these days, a lot of that is about social media.
Right.
You definitely see the younger artists, the Gen Z ones. It's a no-brainer to them because, like, it's just they grew up with it. They never didn't have to do it. It's
Right.
definitely the older artists or the more introverted ones that struggle to find their voice on social media, if you will. And again, that's where myself and a company like mine can help to guide the artists into ultimately being who they are. Like we're not here to manufacture an artist. I know that exists in certain genres, of course.
Yep.
But that's not really where my company Tap Music excel in. Like we're here to just help the artists be themselves in every aspect. I know it's a little odd to say that, but especially now where authenticity and vulnerability is a prize to behold,
Yep.
and you see in an artist like Chapel Rowan, for example, like how everyone is gravitating to her, rightfully so, because you almost feel like you know her just from a couple of social media posts and her performance and her lyrics. Like it's all the full package. And did everybody think that she was going to succeed? No, of course not. Because for the one fact that she was signed to Atlantic and dropped even after she released Pink Pony Club. And, it took her being signed to a different label, Island Records, for everything to click together. So having the right team around you, whether it's management or label, I think can really make or break the career of an artist, frankly.
Yeah, for sure. I've seen that over and over again with some good friends. What do you think your personal rise within the industry and then now with your company, like how did you navigate that successfully and what challenges hit you that you weren't expecting?
I think so many challenges. And now I am connected to some incredible women, Asian, American, Pacific Island, AAPI influential women. Because there are just more of us today in the industry. When I was coming up at Arista, I think there was five of us in the entire industry on the major label side that we knew of, because
Five women or five Asian Americans? Okay.
five
Five.
Asian American women that I
Wow.
knew of. That I was just having dinner with an old friend from Arista just the other day, and we were just saying, like, it was impossible to find a mentor. God knows, like, I wanted one that understood what I was going through, particularly because for me, I didn't grow up in America,
Right.
and there was a lot that I had to really learn from just experience, and a lot of the challenges I had no idea how to navigate. And not to be sounding very feminist here, that's not what I'm trying to say, but there were we had the Me Too movement and all that happened in the last couple of years, but back in the day, I didn't know how to deal with whether it was a latent racism or sexism, like classism. I didn't know how to navigate any of that, and I think I
I don't
said,
think anyone did really, right? I mean, it
yeah,
took the
yeah,
explosions that have happened, I feel like recently for us to figure it out.
absolutely, absolutely, and I think the industry and the country overall just has become a lot more diversified too, and a lot more open to different types of people who look different joining the music industry. And back when I was coming up, it was mostly white men. I
Right.
mean, it's still like that quite a bit in the industry. Like, if you look around, there are very few women running labels or management companies still, or the Spotify's or Apples of this world. It is still mostly white men,
Yeah.
frankly.
Yeah.
It's still challenging. Like, the issue still exists today, but we have more resources in learning how to cope with it. And I actually spent quite a bit of time helping the younger people in the industry, whether it's people who work at tap music, or I often get people hitting me up on social media, or they find my email address, and they just really, the ask is simple. They just really want half an hour of my time to pick my brain, and just, that's why podcasts like yours, like, I think it's necessary, because a lot of these young people come to me asking for some guidance, and even just hearing my story and the stories of the women that you profile on your podcast, it makes a difference. It makes a difference for them to know that they are not the only people going through these issues, right? And that they can have a point of reference and see, like, this could be my journey, and here's maybe how I can, figure out how to solve some of the issues that are standing in my way.
Yeah. I mean, I think that what people encounter now, even with people being more open, seeing more diversity, is they'll encounter the struggle and, a lot will get upset and maybe give up.
Yeah,
You had no way to deal with it because that's just how it was, right?
right, right.
But you proceeded anyway. So where did that strength, and you rose right through the ranks. Where did that strength or resolve or persistence, like what did you use to sort of keep going?
I think I'm a very stubborn person, for one. I just can't take no for an answer. I, I also think it's a good and bad quality that I possess, in that I am able to disassociate when negative things happen to me and file them. Like, in my mind, there are all these filing cabinets, and, like, I literally sometimes, like, almost visualize myself like, well, I can't deal with that problem right now, so I'm just going to put it in that drawer, come back to that later. And some of the things that I want to say are not going to be the most popular, because it's, like I said, that trait is good and bad in being able to switch off your emotions sometimes and really focus on the facts. And I think that's a little bit of a masculine quality too, if that makes sense. And it comes from my mother being overly emotional, which when I was growing up made me very anti-emotions. Um, and now I have a great therapist. I'm much more a rounded, fleshed out person and a lot more vulnerable. But that took years of learning to take my guard down.
Yeah.
But that was also the reason that I was successful, because if I allowed myself to get thrown or get emotional or super upset with all the things that got in my way or how I was treated sometimes, like, I definitely have had episodes in my life where, I had to go hide in the bathroom and cry on a daily basis, and to me, like, I'm someone that because my mother cried so much and I almost saw it as a weapon. So I shut off my tear ducts and like closed off my heart in order to get my job done sometimes. And I will admit this, like recently, one of my managers brought a potential client. Like she wasn't sure, like it was a new artist who had gone through some difficult times already in her very new career, and she definitely was inflicted some emotional damage from her previous male manager. I sat down and I started asking her some very difficult questions because I just wanted to understand what happened to her, because she started the conversation talking about her negative experiences. And as the conversation developed, I'm very to the point. I'm just I'll be very straightforward, and not everyone can take it.
Yeah.
And she started to cry. And for me, I immediately pulled back when that happened. I could see physically, I felt myself pull myself back and like, this is not what I meant to have happen. It's also not very professional because we're having a
Yeah.
professional conversation right now, and I don't know you. The other two women that I was with, the more normal reaction is to go like, "Oh my God, don't cry," and like be more empathetic. And for me, it was the opposite. Like, oh no, we this is not possible to have this conversation anymore. And I've done it in the past as well with staff, where if they get upset, I just go, you should go to the bathroom right now and clean yourself up. And when you're ready to continue the conversation, come back. Like because that's how I was coming up. And maybe that's not the right way to approach things sometimes. And I think, would you have cried like that if I was a man that was asking these questions? Like I don't really know the answers to all these questions, but when you ask me what drove me, I can only think this one quality that I have, which is both a positive and a negative, because God knows, like I've been twice married, twice divorced. Like clearly I needed help getting in touch with my emotions,
Well, at least you're honest about the fact that it's a blessing and a curse, okay? I mean, some
Yeah.
people can't even see their weaknesses. I see mine very clearly. I have to laugh at them, right? Because they're there, and you've seen yours. So I think that's healthier than thinking you're perfect and you need nothing, right? It's funny because I've raised my children with, other children will get injured or something will happen to them, and you see other moms be like, "Oh, you poor baby." And I've always been like, we cannot give our children sympathy, And I'm like, my first thing is, are they bleeding? Do we have to go to the hospital? Then it's just like a hug, but that I refuse to be sympathetic. I refuse. Because I just feel like then it's that I want that attention because it feels good. So in some ways, I think you're right to not emote in those circumstances.
I'm sure I can tell from that you're very good in a crisis too.
I'm very calm. I'm
Yeah,
very calm. I'm just like, are you bleeding? Did you any stitches? Good. Now I can go on to the next thing and we can just get you sorted.
absolutely.
So what made you decide to start TAP? Because I'm sure you had at your previous roles with Arista and you've mentioned some of the artists you've worked with and all that and then you say, "Okay, ready for another adventure." What and was that scary?
Well, I actually started before Tap. I had only been on the label side, although in 2008, when the economy bottomed out and the music industry, like we saw a ton of layoffs, and it was also the beginning of the digital age in music where iTunes appeared, basically. And this is right around the time that Spotify and streaming started up as well, and the industry was quite dysfunctional back then. So I actually got let go from the only job I'd ever known, even though the specifics of the company changed. Like when I started in Singapore with BMG, I never had written a resume. And when I moved to America, Arista was actually under the BMG umbrella at that point. So as the companies merged and separated, I had never needed to look for another job apart from hustling my way into Arista at that point. And when I got let go after the only job I had ever really had in my mind, right? It was a big crisis. I had no idea what to do. I was out of work for a year. And again, I don't have money independently. I need a job, right? And I ended up at the Met Opera, which is not something that I'm familiar with. I took a chance. I did a year there, and then I got headhunted to become the head of classical music at EMI. Again, no classical music background, but I was brought in because of my marketing skill set. That helped shape my view of and confidence that if I can do this, if I can switch gears from hip hop to rock to pop to indie to opera to classical music, I know not everybody can. And a lot of this has to do with being open to learning and being open to taking on advice. And some part of it is humility as well, not coming across as if you know everything. And I think that's a lesson that many people still need to learn, frankly. And that's why I really prioritize listening and learning in my everyday dealings instead of just barnstorming something.
Yeah.
So I was doing all that, and I had the opportunity to go work at Roc Nation, and it was a big deal. It was when I had to think about switching from a label mindset, which is a couple of steps removed from the artist. So it is a different role when you go from label to management, because it's much more closed in. And at Roc Nation, I was offered the job to oversee the label roster as well as the management roster, which was hugely impressive. I mean, obviously Rihanna, Jay-Z, amongst many others like Jaden Smith. And, eventually we had Mariah on the management roster. Like it was a huge challenge. And that was my first foray into switching my head from a label mindset to a management mindset and being much closer to an artist's business, and not just on their music, but all of it. Like,
Right.
Especially someone like Rihanna, I was very lucky to be at the company when she launched Fenty Beauty, her makeup line. And then, in the months that followed, she launched her lingerie line, Savage X Fenty. So being present and being a part of all these music and non-music brand campaigns, I think it really whet my appetite, like just to know more about how everything functions and comes together. And when I was at Roc Nation, I was introduced by Jay Brown to Ben Mawson, who is one of the co-founders at Tap Music, and they needed some help with the marketing for Dua Lipa, who hadn't broken anywhere yet. That was when New Rules had just come out, her breakout single. She wasn't on the map yet. No one really knew who she was. And even though I already had a lot on my plate, and let me tell you, the few years I was at Roc Nation, I don't know if I ever had a full night's sleep. I was surviving on 4 nights of sleep every night, and it was horrible. It wreaks havoc on your skin, on your energy, and you start drinking a lot to just get through the day. And I found myself living, you know, a less healthy life than I wanted to. So taking on board a non-Roc Nation client pro bono was insane. And yet I said yes to it. Like I wanted to do it. And as I started working with Ben and with Dua, it was a really good fit. And I really like the people at Tap Music. It's changed a lot over the 6 years that I've been at Tap now. But back then, they were quite scrappy, and I really liked that. And I like that they were a very small company, especially compared to Roc Nation. And Ben and Ed Millett is his partner, my other boss. So they both founded the company 15 years ago to manage Lana Del Rey, who is their first ever client. And they learned how to do the job on the job too, pretty much, right? And when I started working with people at Tab, at Ben, and I, sometimes like you just feel
Felt
at
like it was,
home.
yeah.
And I felt it. Like I felt that I was able to, they were gonna let me do my thing. And not that doesn't happen everywhere. And by that point, I've worked for enough companies to recognize when I meet really good, kind people.
Yeah.
And they're not the nicest people in the room. That's not what I mean by kind,
Yeah, but
but
not everyone has to be nice at all times. Like there is a
yeah,
toughness that exists in business. You have to be fierce. You can't just be a Pollyanna. Like I can't
yeah.
name one Pollyanna that's never gotten angry or never lost your temper, or never been like, you're not hitting your numbers. Could you please hit your numbers? So I think we have to take that expectation from a younger generation that you have to be a fucking angel at all times out
Absolutely.
of their expectations.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's funny that you say that because, I've been, along with millions around this country, I've been rewatching Veep with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. And when she has that episode, when she does the presidential debates and she starts saying to man up, based on her experience, like I just laugh so much because you don't really want to say that these days, but I also understood what she meant. Like, just like be tough, suck it up. Like, you're not going to succeed by always being the nicest person in the room. But
Correct.
there's nothing wrong with being kind.
Correct.
And I felt it with Ben and Ed and Tap Music. And, it's very obvious too, by the way, because if you look at my company's roster, we have a lot of female solo artists. And that wasn't by design. Like it just kind of happened. Like obviously I wasn't with Tap when they started the company, with Lana Del Rey as their first client, but over the years, like it's like a muscle that if you start working that muscle, you learn how to deal with things better. Because I'll tell you this, managing a female artist is very different from managing a male artist. And again, like I'm generalizing here, obviously, and I know there's many shades in between with LGBTQ and all that. But so I'm just trying to like make this a more basic general conversation. And even on social media, you see a huge difference in the amount of trolling that a female artist gets as opposed to a male artist.
Oh yeah.
And there are a lot of confidence and insecurity issues. And, yes, male artists have glam to like whether it's stylist or hair, but it's on a different scale altogether for a female artist and constantly being judged for what you're wearing, for your appearance, for your hair. Like it takes its toll. And I think over time, like as Tap grew as a company anyway, we developed the understanding of how to overcome some of these very, very difficult challenges that female artists in particular face. And a lot of that is also you can't be super aggressive on how you handle some of these things. Like it takes nuance and it takes a lot of empathy and a lot of kindness. So maybe to the outside, the third parties, we may not always be the nicest people that they're negotiating with, but the kindness, I think, comes from like, we're just trying to do the best for
You're trying
our
to take
clients.
care of your artist.
Exactly.
Yeah. I don't want to end, but I have to appeal to the attention deficit disorder that people have on podcasts.
I get it.
Or not even that. Some people are like, oh, I listen to you on my 20-minute drive. And so I try to keep them sort of 20, 30 minutes. But I would love to have you answer my last two questions, which is, what would we be surprised to know about you? A piece of advice that you either learn the hard way or you want to pass on.
I mean, I think I already let the cat out of the bag. A lot of people are really shocked that I've been married and divorced twice. First of all, I don't go around broadcasting that. But every time that I've casually mentioned it, people just definitely do a double take, because I don't come across as someone who's had a partner. I know this is terrible, but like I've been single for so long now, for the past 12 years, that people are shocked that I had it in me to compromise in my home and have another partner. Because right, you have a husband and kids, like it's different than existing on your own, and part of that is good compromise. You can't always have it your way.
Right.
And I think people, when they get to know me, they just think like, oh no, it's her way or the highway, because that's what she's like at work. But that's not how I'm always like in my personal life. It's just, 12 years, I just hasn't happened.
You're waiting
for the right person hasn't come along.
Right man or woman, whatever.
Yeah, just hasn't happened. And what was the next question?
A piece of advice you'd like to pass on that either you learned the hard way or someone gave to you.
Okay, so this is a lesson actually that is a continuation from my early days in the music industry. In the last couple of months, my dog died at the end of last year after 16 years together, and she was the light of my life. Anyway, I wasn't ready to adopt another dog, so I started volunteering at the local city shelter, which is a kill shelter in Los Angeles. And even taking that on, like I had a lot of mixed feelings. I was like, I don't know if I can do this. Like it's a really tough environment, and the dogs are really, really stressed. And on my orientation, like we were told, you have to assume that every dog's going to bite you. So that's why you need to learn all these techniques and training, because you're going to be alone in a kennel with a dog. So you need to like figure it out very, very quickly. Anyway, so in my normal everyday life, whether it's my personal or my work, like I'm always kind of in charge. Like I'm in control of this and this and this. And at the shelter, I was suddenly the newbie again. And I realized, like, you know what? I forgot how to be humble. So I better like learn this lesson again. And I realized when that realization dawned on me at the animal shelter, I realized that it really was something that I had to bring back into my everyday work and personal life too, because I got used to always being in control. And it is necessary to know when to step back and to know when to let someone else take lead. And it doesn't always have to be me. Yeah. And so I think that's an important lesson, because that is actually how you can progress and be a good team player, if you will. Like you can't always be the leader. Like you have to learn how to be a follower.
Yep. I love it. I love that it was the dogs that taught you that. That's wonderful.
Totally.
Thank you so much for being on today. And I hope we get to work together in the future when my budgets are bigger.
Oh, me too. I hope so. It was so lovely speaking to you, Rebecca.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
I just wanted to thank you guys for listening to today's episode. I also want to ask you to rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts. I know it's a pain in the butt, but it actually helps with search and algorithms. So if you love this podcast, it is an easy way to get it more visible and out there. I also want you to follow me on Instagram at Rebecca Minkoff, at RM Superwomen, and be sure to check out my book, Fearless, The New Rules for Unlocking Creativity, Courage, and Success. Thank you again, and you will hear from me next week.